Following that breaking news in the NFL, the Indianapolis Colts have officially hired Eagles offensive coordinator Shane Steichen as their next head coach. He led the Eagles offense for the past 2 seasons, developing Jalen Hurts into that runner-up position when it comes to the MVP and also into a star QB this past season. But when it comes to the QB situation in Indy, it's much murkier, and it's been that way for the past few years. They could take a QB, of course, to the 4th pick in this year's draft. That would be his first option there and maybe first job when it comes to being the new HC. Want to bring in our Jonathan Jones, of course, and JJ, you spoke about this in Arizona during the Super Bowl, and here we are a few days removed now that Steichen taking over. Your thoughts on this going down, and how did this happen?
Yeah, so it happened because the Indianapolis Colts, this was a very, very thorough search, the largest search run by any NFL team this season, this offseason. There were 5 vacancies, and the Colts interviewed more than a dozen candidates. And then they had a second round of interviews, and that included up to 8 candidates. And then there was no third round, and it took a few days for them to start chipping away at calling coaches and saying, hey, we're going to go in a different direction. It began on Friday, continued into Sunday when it became clear that it was going to be Shane Steichen who would emerge as the winner here for the Indianapolis Colts. Of course, lost the Super Bowl, but the outcome of the Super Bowl really was not going to impact his future as the Indianapolis Colts head coach. The thing that was going to impact it was going to be the contract negotiations that clearly went well on Monday, and so they have now been able to finalize that, and he becomes the next Colts head coach. It's interesting. You go back to 2018 when they were left at the altar by Josh McDaniels, the then Patriots offensive coordinator. They were left scrambling, and they get Frank Reich, who was the offensive coordinator with the Eagles. And then a couple of years later, the Eagles hire as their new head coach the Colts offensive coordinator, Nick Sirianni. And now, a couple years later, the Colts, after this massive search, land on yet another Eagles offensive coordinator in in Shane Steichen. So a little interesting game of passing back and forth between those two franchises.
Speaking of passing, look, there's no Jalen Hurts going to Indy. Andrew Luck is not walking back through that door. If you're Steichen, your first thing with the 4th overall pick, you got to be thinking quarterback. What should it be? Is that his first job here as he takes over?
Well, it's certainly at the top of the list. I mean, you look at it right here, speaking of lists, and they have to figure out life in the post-Andrew Luck era, and that's something that general manager Chris Ballard has been unable to do. But when you look at that list, I would just say, look at how tall, how big those quarterbacks are. The Colts are picking 4th overall. I don't know that they're necessarily going to stay there in order to get their quarterback of the future, but I would imagine that this is a team that's going to target another big quarterback, and I'm talking about through the draft. So that's something to watch. Look, Shane Steichen has a very solid resume in his 3 years as an offensive coordinator. You go back to 2020 with the Los Angeles Chargers, how he was able to develop Justin Herbert, and then he goes and joins Nick Sirianni's staff with the Philadelphia Eagles, helps develop and grow Jalen Hurts into that MVP runner-up, into that guy who just played the best game of his entire life, a game that would win the Super Bowl for a number of quarterbacks over the years that he did on Sunday. And so, yeah, his number one job is certainly to help identify that quarterback of the future in consultation and in relation with general manager Chris Ballard, but it's also just to fix this offense, to get a fresh set of eyes on it. Chris Ballard talked in his postseason press conference about how, listen, maybe some of the things that I've thought haven't necessarily worked. He believes that you have to win in the trenches, offensive and defensive line, something he's not going to compromise on. But this is a Colts team, when you look at the wide receiver position, it's the tallest team in the NFL over the past decade. They're a little slow. They really like traits, big, physical, strong traits, but that's not really the way that the NFL is moving, right? I mean, we just saw in the Super Bowl which way the NFL is moving. You need some smaller, shifty athletes out there. And so I think the Colts are going to be charged with sort of rethinking and remaking how they feel about those pass catchers here this offseason. And then Shane Steichen is going to be able to integrate the RPO game a little bit into the Colts offense, something that works so well for Philadelphia. And then, of course, finding that next quarterback and hopefully settling that position for years to come.
Outside of looking at the next quarterback there, you just mentioned it there. Jonathan Taylor at one point was considered the best running back in the league. That offensive line, they had some pieces as well. And also Michael Pittman, we saw flashes for him in another season. Can they see that jump, or are they expecting that jump from what they saw from the Eagles offense transitioning over here to Indy with him now at the helm?
Yeah, I mean, look, you had an Eagles offense that would run whenever they wanted to, that would pass whenever they wanted to, and just basically did whatever the defense was going to allow them to. I don't know that we're going to see Jonathan Taylor and Shane Steichen's offense go out there and lead the NFL in rushing. And that doesn't mean that he can't be as effective a rusher as he was 2 seasons ago. It just, that wasn't what was going to be the case for Philadelphia, where they just said, okay, defense wants us, is saying beat us this way. Well, then we'll go out there and we'll beat them that way. And so, it's still some things to be determined there. Elsewhere, though, when you look on the defensive side, Gus Bradley, the defensive coordinator there for the Indianapolis Colts, this will allow the Colts to have some continuity on the defensive side if they want to, if Shane Steichen wants to. They already have that sort of infrastructure set up. And so, meanwhile, when you look at the Philadelphia Eagles, who are losing their offensive coordinator, well, they have a guy already waiting in the wings, and that's quarterbacks coach Brian Johnson, heavily sought after around the league. It is extremely thought of and considered that he is going to be promoted to the offensive coordinator position with the Philadelphia Eagles rather than taking a position elsewhere. And so watch his rise continue there in terms of what Philly does next.
JJ, when you look at the AFC South, you got the Texans at the bottom of the barrel. Of course, the Titans, we have no idea which direction they're going. But the Jacksonville Jaguars, of course, ascending to the top there. If you're Steichen, are you coming in with the mentality that this is a win-now position for them?
Well, I think so. I mean, 2 years ago, you had a Colts team that was 2 bad Carson Wentz games away from making the playoffs, right? They had 7 Pro Bowlers on that team. That was still 2 years ago. And, you're going to need a little bit more than just relying on nostalgia and good vibes from 2021 to get back to the playoffs. But yeah, look, the Jags, what we saw this past season with Doug Peterson, with Trevor Lawrence, with the wide receivers that they have. Remember, they traded for Calvin Ridley, so he should be reinstated at any point this offseason and then be out there playing for them as a true #1 receiver along with Christian Kirk. Like, you look at that Jags team, you're like, hey, they could be here for a little bit. You look at this Texans team, and it's finally time for the Houston Texans to use all of those draft picks to find their quarterback of the future in the draft, to have DeMeco Ryans come and get his hands on that defense. And then, of course, the Tennessee Titans, who are not in a reset, sort of in a retooling mode, right? A team that has dominated that division for the last couple of years. And so the Colts, they may like their chances. I think a lot of folks right now are going to have the Jags as that #1 team in the AFC South. Still a lot to be figured out for Indy, but they shouldn't be at the dregs of the division like we've seen this past year.
So the Colts, of course, filling their void when it comes to head coaches. That leaves us with one job, JJ. You were just in Arizona, of course. It's been kind of quiet when it comes to the Cardinals. What are you hearing about filling, of course, the void there after Cliff Kingsbury was fired not too long ago?
So they interviewed Eagles defensive coordinator Jonathan Gannon yesterday. So coming off that very disappointing loss in the Super Bowl, Gannon interviewed there. And the thought here was Monty Ossenforth, the general manager, wanted to get Gannon in the building. He was already there. NFL rules mandated that they couldn't interview him the week of the Super Bowl. And so they had that interview. They had already interviewed and sort of trimmed it down to Mike Kafka, the Giants offensive coordinator, and Bengals defensive coordinator Lou Anarumo. And talking with folks in Arizona, the issues that persisted throughout the season are the issues that they want to get corrected, and that's leadership and accountability at the very top of the food chain. That's what they believe they got in Monty Ossenfort at general manager, former Patriots guy. That's what they hope to get out of the head coach position, where, if you get that grizzled vet like a Lou Anarumo, if you get a really steady guy like a Jonathan Gannon, that hopefully you can get that accountability, that leadership to get back in the building, something that they need Kyler Murray to be coached. I'm told Kyler Murray wants to be coached. We're going to see just how much that ultimately works out, but Cardinals have plenty to figure out, including who their week 1 starting quarterback is ultimately going to be. They know that they're going to be without Kyler Murray for a large portion of next season. So I would imagine that the Cardinals will make their decision here Certainly this week, maybe within the next 48 or so hours. And I think it's very telling that they waited and waited to talk with Jonathan Gannon, a guy who, look, Andy Reid and Eric Bieniemy got the better of Jonathan Gannon's scheme on some crucial plays down at the goal line. Certainly those quick little jet motions in and out, those short motions that got those wide open touchdowns to Kadarius Toney and Sky Moore. But otherwise, Nick Sirianni talked about it. They played a really good defensive game. It was just in those moments, two great teams, the better team got the best of Jonathan Gannon, but I don't think that's going to prevent the Arizona Cardinals from moving forward if they want to make them their next head coach.
Lead NFL insider Jonathan Jones joined us here with that breaking news on Shane Steichen to Indy there. Appreciate it as always, JJ. So it's not official unless it's on Twitter, and there it is, Shane Steichen getting rid of the Eagles green to the Colts blue there. And there you see the caption, "We got our guy." And yes, indeed, hopefully maybe looking for the next Jalen Hurts and maybe trade for A.J. Brown there for Indy. They do have the pieces, but we'll see there if they can take advantage of the AFC South that is still up for grabs. Hey, don't forget the Pick Six pod, always tapping in. I'm sure this will be the discussion of Shane Steichen take it over in Indy. Also, their latest pod, the guys, instant reaction from Super Bowl 57, and Mahomes getting it done there in Arizona.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.